Japanese Prime Minister in solemn mourning suit visiting a shrine to commemorate Japan's war dead. And as he emerged, Prime Minister Abe was quick to claim that he'd only come here to pray for peace.
I paid my respects to the war dead who sacrificed their precious lives for Japan and also prayed for their souls to rest in peace.
Yasukuni Shrine is also home to the spirits of dozens of convicted war.
Japanese people were still inflicted with a one-sided sense of atonement towards the war as a result of the War Guilt Information Program infused by GHQ's initiative. A plan designed to brainwash the Japanese and instill a feeling of guilt regarding the war. In addition to concealing America's responsibility for the war, this program aimed to crush the morale of Japanese people so that Japan would never again resist against the United States of America. Furthermore, media restrictions enforced by a press code made it impossible to criticize the Tokyo trial or to report trials taking place in China and Korea. Many Japanese people were instilled with a feeling of guilt towards the war, believing that Japan is an evil nation that invaded other countries. The spiritual cohesiveness of Japanese people was crushed by methodical actions to disparage the tradition and history that were the source of national pride. Eventually, it succeeded to completely dispel patriotism, to instigate distrust toward government leaders amongst citizens, and to divide public opinion by encouraging communist activity under the name of democracy.
In the meantime, he talks cavalierly about encouraging other nations, as Hillary pointed out, to develop nuclear weapons, as if nuclear war is some trivial affair. Does he not understand we wrote Japan's constitution to say they could not be a nuclear power? Where was he when...
The Japanese Communist Party would like to say that Article 9 is the result of the many sacrifices that were made by the Japanese people in the past war. And finally, the Japanese people have come to possess this Constitution, Pacific Constitution, which we believe is our treasure and something that we can be very proud of in this world. And therefore, we want to continue to defend, uphold this Constitution, and create a Japan which can leverage on this Constitution. Last question about the name of our party. We want to treasure our name.
The Communist Party was popular in the 60s and 70s and has kept a strong presence in local and prefectural assemblies. Still, it remains weak at the national level, with 9 seats out of 480 at the House of Representatives.
It is the Communist Party which can claim to be the clean party. Right, so a lot of people are turned off of politics, whether it's the LDP ruling party or the leading opposition party, the DPJ. They always lurch from scandal to scandal and money politics as usual. The Communist Party offers an alternative.
At the end of World War II, during the last stages of the war, there were some very fierce battles, and the Americans really were afraid of the Japanese. They were afraid that when the war ended, Japan would not properly capitulate, and then it would be very difficult to bring this country under control. So when Japan did surrender, MacArthur came in and he set up, the Supreme Allied Powers set up this organization to administer Japan. It's called GHQ, General Headquarters, and it was headed by General MacArthur. And of course, the war ended on, theoretically it ended on August 15th, and by early September they had put into place a war guilt information program. One of the biggest parts of that was a press code where the all of the members of the press, that means the printed press and also the broadcast press, which, however, there was not any television at the time, so we're talking mainly radio. All of these people were to adhere to 30 rules. First of all, no criticism of GHQ, and no criticism of the Tokyo War Crimes trial. Absolutely no criticism of the fact that GHQ wrote the new Constitution, and no mention of the fact that there is this censorship system. Of course, everything published had to be run through the censors first, and they were looking at something like 5,000 pieces of information each day that had to be cleared through the censors. But to even discuss that system was in place was against the rules. And you were not to criticize the following countries: America, Russia, England, or the UK, Korea, China, or any of the other allied powers, or at all. You couldn't criticize any of these people at all. And there was to be no discussion of how the Japanese were treated in Manchuria after the war. And as you know, a lot of those people were held against their will and used for forced labor, but that was not to be discussed or not to be criticized. You couldn't criticize the policies of the Allied powers before the war. As you know, there's a strong feeling among many people that the Americans actually drove Japanese to war because of their economic policies, where they put in place this almost bulletproof blockade all the way around Japan so that Japan couldn't get any fuel or food. Not to give the impression that World War III might be coming. No discussion of the Cold War. No discussion of Japan as a holy country, or nationalism, or the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, as they called it in those days. That is not to be discussed. That was Japan's plan to kind of decolonize the whole Far East. Couldn't discuss that. No other advertising. I don't know what that means. I guess it means whatever the censors don't want to have advertised. No trying to justify any of the people who were convicted as war criminals. No justification and no discussion about the relations between American soldiers and Japanese women. No discussion of black markets or the occupation troops, and you must not exaggerate claims of starvation. And no false reporting. I love that. All of the reporting ends up being false when it's run through a censor. So this is really hilarious. But anyway, no false reporting, and no inappropriate things about GHQ, and of course, no early disclosure of information which is not supposed to be disclosed, whatever that means. It's all up to the censors. So this was put in place, and it was immensely successful. This is basically an indoctrination or brainwashing campaign, and the purpose was to make the Japanese people submit, and I wouldn't say necessarily become a peace-loving people, but at least they wouldn't be a warmongering people. That was the idea. It was wildly successful. The Japanese press followed the code, basically. The Asahi newspaper broke it a couple of times and got themselves had their newspaper stopped a couple of times, but generally speaking, most people obeyed it. Problem is, they continue to obey it. And even now, there are lots of things that you cannot discuss on television or anywhere else, and or even in political debates. One of those taboos is the Constitution. For some reason, Japanese think, or a lot of Japanese, I would say even probably a majority of Japanese think, that there's something sacred about that Constitution that they shouldn't discuss changing it. Now, I don't know any constitution in the world that's a perfect constitution, okay? And certainly not the Japanese Constitution. That was written by GHQ staff. It's not a bad constitution, but it's got a couple of problems in it. And I don't see any problem with discussing that now, but they don't like to do it. And To do so is somehow considered some kind of traitorous act. I don't understand that, but I think it stems from this press code. The press regularly refrains from criticizing either of the Koreas or China on some things that they really ought to be more critical about. They sort of dutifully cover the story, but they don't really dig in deep. I guess the one that they obey, the one that they disobey the most is about false reporting, because there's plenty of that goes on. And anyway, the point is, when you have a system like that in place, first of all, anything that you read or hear in the media, you can't believe. And the fact that that effect is still strong in the Japanese media makes the Japanese media less effective for formulating proper policy, and also less trustworthy. And you end up with things happening like when the Asahi newspaper published all those false reports about comfort women and such. There just isn't the oversight of the press that there ought to be, because they kind of I don't know, they just hold back and on some things, and then they go overboard on other things. The balance is not there. Anyway, it's all the Americans' fault, I guess. That's the conclusion.